Hey everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and I'm here today to, well, I was supposed to talk to you about our new brushless fan setup, brushless stage 2 fan setup, and then it kind of turned into a little bit of a science experiment, and well, we'll see how this works out. But I am going to talk to you about our new stage 2 brushless fan setup, because we're pretty excited about this. Brushless fan technology, or brushless motor technology, has really revolutionized a lot of industries. If you're in remote control cars, you know all about this, of course. But even things like ceiling fans, the big ass fans that are so quiet and so efficient, stuff like that, they use brushless, basically digitally controlled motors. I'm pretty sure that's what Dyson uses too. They talk about their digital motors. I think they're talking about brushless. A different way of running a motor, but what it allows the motor to do is it's very strong, very high torque, but it also can control the speed extremely well. It can start up slowly without the big startup surge you get for some kind of motors. And you can vary the speed exactly where you want it. And what this means for car applications is that we can have the cooling fan deliver exactly as much flow as required based on exactly what the temperature is doing. So if you're just tooling around town, you need just a little bit of airflow, or you're not working the engine too hard, it's just a whisper, it doesn't make any noise. If you're going at the track, or if you're really loading up this thing, if you're in Phoenix stuck in traffic with the AC on, it has the ability to move a ridiculous amount of air, scaling up and down as required. So brushless fans are not available to the aftermarket generally. They're used in military applications, they're used in OE applications. But luckily, we are good friends with the guys at SPAL, and they have basically allowed us to sell kits with the brushless fans in them. And we have our stage 3 kit, includes 2 brushless fans. It's this same sort of design as this with the 2 fans side by side. 2 brushless fans, moves an absolutely ridiculous amount of air, but it's expensive. That's the downside to this stuff, of course, is it's not cheap, it takes a little bit of a controller. So Kyle Tiger, one of our R&D guys, came up with the idea of using a single large fan instead of 2 smaller ones. This is a 14-inch instead of 2 12s, I think it is what those are. And that allowed us to package a bigger fan that moves more air than a smaller fan. A 12-inch fan doesn't move as much air as a 14. It's simple. But because there's only one, it's less expensive. So this allowed us to bring brushless fan technology down to a lower price, down to a more accessible price. So I'm going to play around with these a little bit in a moment and show off what they can do. It's kind of fun. We were trying to think of various ways to demonstrate this. But one of the things I want to emphasize is, first off, you do need a fan for cooling. A lot of people think if you're on the track, you don't need a fan because you've got all that air coming in the nose. And we have, over the last few months, been talking about venting this and venting that and pressure here and pressure there, and I'm back on pressure again. If you don't have the means to pull air out of that engine bay, if you don't have hood vents, you're not getting as much airflow through your radiator, through your heat exchangers as you think. The airspeed inside the engine bay is actually quite low. There's very little exchange of air going on in there at speed, unless you've done a lot of aerodynamic work to suck that air back out again. I mean, even NASCARs run cooling fans, and they never really slow down other than the occasional parade lap or safety car, even though safety cars are not exactly tooling around. So what's a safety car NASCAR speed? It's probably about the same as top speed of a Miata at Road America, Anyhow, fans are important, and fans that aren't spinning, of course, they're a obstruction, but fans that are moving and working can actually make quite a difference in cooling, which is why we emphasize them so much as part of our cooling systems. We concentrate on radiators. We developed a cross-flow radiator for the Miata that's become so popular. We've been concentrating on fans. We do hood vents. We have our coolant reroute that's got we've talked about that in the past, but this is part of the equation, is getting that heat out of the radiator. So what I'm going to talk about is fan rating. Most people, you just look for that one peak number, right? This fan moves 1400 CFM or whatever it is. And the thing is that fan rating is very much like horsepower. You can have, it's not a single number. Actually, I'll show you a demonstration first. Obviously not a Miata fan, but this is a 480 CFM 6-inch exhaust fan. Obviously not. Wouldn't recommend this for Miata application. It's very cheaply made. If you're trying to exhaust air out of a garage, maybe it might be a little bit better. But it has this handy flow indicator on it. Let me plug this in. Please keep your fingers free. There we go. Visible example of flow. And now, let's put some restriction on this thing. This is a 6 to 4 inch inlet duct. So have a look, watch what happens on this thing when I plug this in. As soon as that fan has to do any work, the flow drops way down. And if I had a heat exchanger in here, it'd pull that down even further. There's less and less air moving through there as the restriction goes up. So this fan might have a good peak CFM number when it's basically in free air, but as soon as you're asking it to do any work, it starts suffering and it just can't move the air that it needs to move. Stop. Now see, if this was a stronger fan, this has got a little tiny motor in here. If this was a stronger fan, yeah, you can see the quality of stuff that we deal with house ventilation. If it had more torque and a better designed fan, it would actually be able to pull through that restriction much more effectively with less loss. So what does that mean for car fans? It means that you need torque. I'll show you here, right here. This is, and you'll see these on our website, this is actually off the listing for this thing. This is CFM versus, well, that's CFM, versus basically the pressure it's being asked to pull. This is how hard it's working. And you can see that this is our stage 1, our new stage 2, and our stage 3. You can see it at very low, basically almost free air. They're not too badly spaced, but you can see as the load, the pressure builds up, the stage 1 just falls on its face. Stage 2 and the stage 3 actually start to converge. It's quite impressive how the stage 2 behaves on this. But what this is as you're trying to pull through a radiator, through an air conditioning condenser, through an intercooler, through an oil cooler, you start stacking up that stuff in front of that fan and it needs to be able to pull harder and harder. It needs that torque. So that's why you don't see any slimline fans in our catalog. That's because most slimline fans, they have a small motor with not a lot of torque and they cannot move air through those stacked up heat exchangers. So if you're ever trying to evaluate the effectiveness of a fan setup and you don't have the full chart there showing CFM versus pressure like you do on the SPAL fans, have a look at the motor size. If it's a little skinny flat motor, a slimline fan, it's going to basically be very little good for anything other than filming a rock video and making people's hair blow in the breeze. If you're actually trying to pull air through a heat exchanger, you don't want a little skinny fan. This is our old stage 2. It has a large fan and a small fan, and even this is considerably bigger than some of the other brands you'll see out there. Some of the slimline stuff, great for packaging, but a lot of them are actually a downgrade off stock. There's some very popular fan kits out there that pull less air through the radiator than stock ones do. This is a more powerful fan. This is the bigger of the two. It's got a big torquey motor. Another way you can tell if it's got a strong motor is basically does it pull a lot of amps. If you, heck, you can look at the size of the wiring even. Actually, you can look at the size of the wiring. They're about the same. This one's got fairly small wires. These are a little bit bigger. And we'll look at the stage 2 and the brushless in just a moment. But if you're trying to judge a fan kit, that's one of the things to look at. Is just look at the sheer size of the motors. The other thing to look at, and I'm going a little bit off script here, but the other thing to look at is the shroud, and I'll get back to the shroud in a moment. So let's look at this brushless guy. First off, that is an enormous motor. Look at that thing. It's huge. Different technology, but it's also, this thing has got some pull to it. There we go, put this back on its little stand. It's also kind of built backwards. It's funny, the motor's on the front on these things. Whatever. It means for a very thick shroud and very thin on the backside, packaging these can be a little bit of a problem. But look at the size of the power wires on this puppy. That's an indicator that that motor's got the ability to pull some serious power, move some serious air. So, should I talk about shrouds first, or should I switch straight for the demos? Let's do the demos. The demos are fun. So here's one in here. Travis, have a look at this thing. This is our, again, as I said, this is our new stage 2 brushless setup. And I have it set up, we have it hooked up to this car because these brushless fans, you can't just hook them up to a battery and have them run properly. They need proper PWM control. So we have it hooked up to this car, and this car thinks it's running its air conditioning. We did a little bit of wiring, but if you watch, you'll see it twitch. That's a characteristic of these things. There we go. They're digitally controlled. It's got to sort of get itself together. Safety first here. We have learned when you're doing this, do not leave anything on the table. We were blowing stuff all over the place yesterday when we were testing this stuff up. And I apologize if this is going to be hard to hear because of the airflow. But this is a nice minimal airflow. This is what you would use if the car needs just a little bit of extra help. This can be controlled either by a separate brain, which is what's being done here, or it can be controlled by an aftermarket ECU. No, I just turned it too far. I'm faking a temperature here. An aftermarket ECU that can do PWM control. Let's turn it up all the way, shall we? This is fun. Gotta tell you, on a hot day, that feels pretty good. But one of the nice things about this, there's no startup surge. This thing can start its way up slowly, so it doesn't bog down your alternator. If you've ever dealt with engine tuning, you know that when the fans kick in, there's that big electrical hit. You can actually stall the car if you're not tuned properly. So this has got a nice gradual increase. You know, when you're putting fuses on fans like this, you actually need to put a fuse in that's about twice as big as the constant load, because the startup surge is so big it'll blow a 20 amp fuse, even if it only takes 10 amp to run. So that's one nice thing about these. Let's see if I can actually instrument this. This is an experiment. We don't know if it's going to work. We've talked about magnehelic gauges before. This is basically showing pressure differential. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the inlet underneath the fan, and we'll see how much difference there is in pressure on each side of it. I don't know how scientific this is, but it's kind of fun because you can see stuff move around. So that's what we're going to do. Turn it up part way. Yeah, not a whole lot. Okay. These fans are sealed, by the way. I think you can actually run them underwater, although, man, it would make a mess of your engine bay. Okay, so, as you can see, we pretty much pegged the gauge on that. So I'm going to put this underneath our stage 2 kit. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here because this is, of course, 2 fans. I'll measure the bigger of the 2, but it should be able to move more than half of what that did if it's going to try to keep up. Now, watch this thing twitch when I turn it on. This is a 20 amp fuse. This is the only option for these things, is full throttle. There's no halfway on them. That kick is indicative of how much sorry, our microphone's on the way. It's probably being delivered right now. We have a better microphone, but that kick is indicative of the sheer hit that this thing gives the electrical system. If I didn't have that circuit breaker in there, if I was just touching wires, there'd be sparks all over the place. Travis wanted me to throw the sparks because he thought it was exciting, but I decided not to electrocute myself on camera today. We will do that not in a live video. We'll do it so we can do several takes. So, this circuit breaker is, I believe, out of an F-15. A friend of mine who works for an Air Force base sent it to me in a project I built years ago. So, yeah, we're using actual proper mil-spec circuit breakers. Thank you, taxpayers. Anyhow, you could see when I was doing it that time, it never got past, maybe 0.2 at the best, whereas this one pegged the gauge. Again, maybe not the most scientific. We're not controlling the ingress of the air, although they're both sitting about the same height off the ground. But it really does show. We're trying to think of ways to show how much these things could, how much air these are moving, and that was the best thing we could come up with. So, shrouds. I'll talk about shrouds for a second, because we've got lots of general cooling and fan questions when we were doing this. Don't let me leave that there, because otherwise I will blow it into the room. There we go. One of the questions we had was, why do we block off the rest of the radiator? And that's because air is lazy. And it will take the easy way to get somewhere. And so if you've got a fan, and this is, I will admit that years ago, this is what our fan kits looked like. If you have a fan just mounted to the face of the radiator with a couple of straps and nothing behind it, what will happen is that the fan will start pulling air this way, and the air will come in from the sides and go through the fan that way. It won't go through the radiator, because that's harder work than simply going around it. And so what you do by not having a shroud, by simply having it sitting on a core, is you're just basically recirculating the air inside the engine bay. If you have the fan right up against the core, well, then you're not pulling air through this much of it. And it's a surprisingly small percentage of the surface area of the radiator. So you're not using your whole radiator. So if you see a fan that's not on a shroud, it's basically not going to work very well. It's not going to do much. It might be for emergencies only or who knows what, but it's not a sign of a well-engineered setup because it's not pulling through the radiator properly. The other question is how thick it is. And this, as you can see, this is our old Stage 2. Our Stage 1 looks like this. I think it's got 2 of these fans in it. We get these as far off the radiator as we can. And that's to allow the air that's coming through the radiator core, say around here, a chance to move sideways and get behind the fan. If these are too close to the surface, again, it only pulls through, it's actually warm, only pulls through the central parts of the core. So you need it spaced back. So if you're looking at a fan kit, trying to evaluate, don't look for a shroud that's as close as possible to the core because it's not going to pull it through the entire radiator. So thin fans, flat shroud, bad sign. There's a very popular kit out there. It's cheap. It's not worth taking off stock fans for because it's like that. It's really thin. It's really close to the core. This one you can see is on a fat shroud, partly because the fan itself is so fat, but it does allow for a lot of airflow around the corners. And here's something I don't know if anybody else does, at least not in the aftermarket, the OEs do it, is we build these bypass flaps in here. And there's one in place here. And this is a rubber flap. It's actually a SPAL part number. So that if you are, horsing down the track or something like that, and you have more pressure in front of your fan than behind, or in front of your radiator than behind it, say if your fans aren't running, these can open up and allow some airflow through. And these are used, I know the BMW E39 uses them. They're used on Volkswagens, probably a bunch of others. Those are just the ones we've come across in the wild. But this is a fairly common thing in the OEs, is these bypass flaps. And you can see we put as many as possible in here so that when the fan's not running, you can use the natural airflow. It can move as much as possible. When the fan starts running, the air pressure drops inside the shroud. They glue themselves shut so that all the air has to go through the fan. It also requires a controller, and that controller can be an aftermarket ECU, something with a spare PWM. Most Mega Squirts should be able to pull it off. The Hydra certainly can. If you do not have an ECU with a spare PWM output, then you can we have a built-in brain that basically it has its own temperature sensor. You can't see it, unfortunately. It's underneath the dashboard. Your install will not look like this. However, back here, there's a temperature sensor that's used for the brain kit. That's very hot. For the brain kit to allow it to test or to check the temperature and work in a closed loop. So it's almost like it's its own thermostat. So if you do not have an ECU that can handle that, there you go. Now we have designed this. We have a question, Travis.
Quick question.
Yes.
Would we recommend these on street-driven turbo cars, or are the factory fans good enough?
Okay. Good question. I'll get that to just a moment. I probably shouldn't stick my fingers in that thing when it's plugged in. Again, we're live. Don't want to be chopping hot dogs on live television. These are designed primarily to work on a cross-flow radiator. As you know, there are a number of options on the market today. The cross-flow has much better flow internally. It's a much more efficient radiator. So we're assuming if you're at the sort of place where you need a good fan, you hopefully already have a good radiator. I honestly do not remember if we have a non-cross-flow variant on this. We do? Okay, we do have a non-cross-flow variant on this. So it's available for upright radiator, shall we call it. I would strongly recommend, if you are going to be running one of these, if you're at this point in your cooling career, then a cross-flow is probably already in your car. We do have that new Flyin Miata one coming shortly, and there are other options on the market as well. This should work on any of them because they are very similar in design externally in most cases. So, would it work well on a street car with a stock radiator? Well, you need that. Was it a stock radiator? This is just a street car. Yes, this is an excellent street car setup. It's actually what we have in Roller Girl here. We have the Stage 3 setup, which is overkill, in Captain Bob, our blue NA car. That's mostly just to make sure everything works okay. But the nice thing about them in a street car is they're not noisy. A set of Stage 3 fans or Stage 2 fans like this, you've heard the amount of noise they make all the time. Those ones work Stage one at a time. Anyway, this one can be whisper quiet. When you're not really working it hard, it's super quiet. You don't get that idle dip, that electrical hit when it starts up. So it's actually a very nice street car setup. And when you need it to move lots of air, it can move lots of air. Even if you're on the track and you've got lots of airflow through the radiator, when you come into the pits, this thing will pick up the pace and it will deliver a hurricane of air through your radiator as it cools down in the pits. Because of course, heating doesn't stop just because you have stopped lapping. Travis, what other questions did we have about these things? I'm trying to remember.
We had a specific question about the specific CFM and ampage.
Yeah, the amperage draw. I don't have the amperage draw on hand.
We had a couple of questions about fitment.
Yeah, fitment is the downside on these things. They're fat. Actually, Travis, you want to come over here and have a look at the engine bay. This is the stage 1 brushless in here. That's the lift. This is the stage 1 brushless in here. You can see that it is, overall, it's an extremely fat shroud, but the fan itself doesn't protrude past there. So it's a different sort of fitment. The old stuff, you'd have these 2 motors sticking out of it. You can see it will clear our what do you call it? That's our sway bar. I should know what that thing is. It will clear our sway bar. That's a 1-inch sway bar in there. If you're running a real monster sway bar, there's probably room for 1.25 inches in there, I would guess. That'd get you about there. If you're going past 1.25 inches in your sway bar, you may have to tweak things around a little bit, but I think at that 1.25 inches you should be okay, and that's about as big as I think anybody's ever put in one of these things. So there's the fitment. It's a much easier shape to understand than the old kits. And this one is spaced out a little bit. We actually have the ability to pull it back a little closer in if we want to. We do recommend, you can see here we have these spacers in here. We do recommend running as many spacers, running this as far away from the core as you can, simply because we want you to get as much space in here to allow that airflow to move around. For maximum efficiency, this should actually really be taped up. These little holes should be covered so that they don't accidentally pull a little air through. And this car, in our desert use, in our testing, has not been required. And this car will be at the track this weekend doing some other testing, but at the same time we'll be torture testing this tooling system. Good. Yes, Travis.
Is there something we recommend to specifically fill the gaps you were talking about?
Yeah, there's a couple of things you can use. For small gaps, you can use foil tape, which here's a piece of it. It's nothing exotic. It'll do a small gap. The problem with foil, and you can actually make it look quite nice if you smooth it down. You can make it look very, I don't want to say professional, but if you get paid to do it, I guess it's professional. The problem with it, it's not very structurally strong, so it'll only take a certain amount of load until it rips itself open. So you can't use it for big holes. For big holes, what I would probably do is use something with a little more strength. Duct tape. It's actually a good use. Duct tape is not necessarily as airtight, so I would probably lay it over with that. And I'm sure many other people have their own favorite tapes. I love this foil tape. I use it all the time for stuff. But its downside is it's not structurally as strong as some others. So I would give it a bit of a backing if you're using it for that use. So amperage, unfortunately, I can't help you with. I will give you this fan flow comparison one more time. This is also on our website. If you go to flyinmiata.com and you have a look at the stage 2 fan kit, that is, you will see this exact diagram there. But you can really see the stage 2 is it almost doesn't drop off at all. This big torquey fan, this big 14, really pulls through when it's having to fight against some back pressure or against the pressure. Stage 1, it's a good upgrade from stock, but you can see it's in a different league from the other 2. And that stage 3 is a complete monster. Stage 3 looks like this, but it's got 2 of these fans in it. We have had people ask if you can take our original stage 2 kit and upgrade it to this, and I think you can see there's not a single part in common. There might be a couple of bolts, but the shroud is totally different. The controllers, of course, are totally different. The wiring is going to be different because of the way this is set up. So unfortunately, there is no upgrade path from the old stage to the new stage 2. There is an upgrade path from the current stage 1 to the old stage 2, and that's simply a matter of swapping some fans out. We do not sell the fans individually, but SPAL fans are available elsewhere. We can get you those part numbers if you want them. So there is that upgrade path. The old stage 2 is not on here, but it really did not compare to the new one at all. It was far more like the stage 1 flow patterns than it was the new stage 2 flow patterns. So the brushless, it's a little bit more expensive. Still, you have an E39 M5, much cheaper. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's a very, very effective and very good all-around setup. So we're very happy with this. Very happy that Kyle was able to do the work to bring this to market at a lower price point. So I think I've addressed most of the fan-based questions. I know we had some questions about normal coolant temperatures and that sort of thing. I'm not going to touch that today. That gets into a very specific information about your car, and I would recommend you contact our tech support guys about that if you have questions about your own specific use case. I'm mostly trying to make sure everyone understands how this all works out. So I'm going to turn this on full speed one more time just because it's fun. I don't think I have anything I can throw in there and blow around the room, but hopefully you can hear what this sounds like as it's ramping up. It's ridiculous. You can just hear it start to howl. We actually measured earlier. We had it supported on the ends, and it was deflecting enough. We were getting worried the fan was going to hit the table. It was actually pulling the aluminum shroud down by, what was it? It was 4 millimeters, I think. So let's give it a little twitch, get it started. There it goes. There's a nice little autumn breeze. With the engine running and the hood closed, you basically are not going to be able to hear that. Then I think we need to get about a dozen of these things and put them on a platform and make some sort of drone, see if we can make at least a hovercraft out of these things. It's the sheer amount of air it flows. Yeah. So, there we go. The new Stage 2 brushless fan kit, only from Flyin Miata. I don't think there's anybody else in the Miata aftermarket space that is offering brushless fan technology. I'm not even sure there's anybody in the aftermarket automotive space, period, that's offering this. Very glad that SPAL was able to work with us and bring the brushless to the community. If you have any questions about this, please put them in the comments. We will do our best to answer them. Of course, have a look, FlyinMiata.com. You'll see both the Stage 2 and the Stage 3 brushless setups out there. We don't currently have a plan for a Stage 1 brushless, simply because there's a minimum size that these things come in. If we can come up with something, we will. At the moment, though, this is the best we can do, what's available to us in terms of bringing the price point down for everyone. And honestly, at this price point, at the amount of air it moves and the effectiveness at increasing your cooling capability, if you don't feel like putting hood vents in your car or making it look like some sort of science experiment gone wrong, it's a great way to go. So if you have questions, throw them in the comments. Feel free to hit us up with any more. Have a look at the Flyin Miata website. And my name is Keith Tanner. Thank you very much for paying attention, for putting up with my crazy science fair experiment stuff that may or may not be scientifically valid, but was very much fun to do. And we'll see you next week.